Marcus Webb was 38 years old when he made the purchase that would alter the course of his life forever. He stood in the gravel driveway of the Hollow Creek Ranch, watching dust devils swirl across the abandoned property as the real estate agent struggled to find the right key on an overcrowded ring. The ranch had been sitting empty for nearly 22 years, ever since the previous owner, a cattle rancher named Douglas Pemberton, had declared bankruptcy and walked away from everything he'd built. The main house had boarded windows, the fencing was mostly collapsed, and the pastures were choked with thistle and tumbleweeds. Most people driving past on Highway 87 didn't even slow down anymore. It was just another casualty of the changing West, another reminder that the rodeo life and ranching dreams didn't pay the bills like they used to. But Marcus saw something different when he looked at those weathered buildings and overgrown fields. He saw possibility. He saw redemption. And most importantly, he saw a way to honor the cowboy life that had defined him since he was 13 years old. Marcus had been riding in rodeos since his teenage years, following in the footsteps of his uncle Daniel Webb, who had been a champion bronc rider in the 1980s before a career-ending injury forced him into retirement. It was dangerous, unpredictable work that paid sporadically and offered no health insurance, no pension, and no guarantee that you'd walk away from each ride without broken bones or worse. By the time Marcus reached his late 30s, he had accumulated 17 fractures, 2 concussions, and a right shoulder that dislocated so frequently he could pop it back in himself without wincing. He had never settled down, never bought property, and spent most of his time traveling from town to town in a fifth-wheel trailer hitched to a diesel truck that burned through money as fast as he could earn it. His life was transient, unpredictable, and according to everyone who cared about him, completely unsustainable. His older sister, Rachel, had been pleading with him for nearly 5 years to retire from competition and take a coaching job at the Youth Rodeo Academy 2 towns over, but Marcus couldn't bring himself to do it. Riding wasn't just his profession, it was his identity, his purpose, the only thing he'd ever been truly exceptional at. The Hollow Creek Ranch came up for sale on a humid Thursday afternoon in early June. Marcus had heard about it from Vincent Martinez, a 71-year-old retired livestock auctioneer who still attended every rodeo within driving distance and had known Marcus since he was a kid, learning to ride steers at county fairs. Vincent mentioned it casually while they were loading Marcus's horse into the trailer after a disappointing performance in Amarillo, saying the county was finally liquidating Douglas Pemberton's old place and wondering if anyone would be foolish enough to take it on. Marcus felt something catch in his chest when Vincent said it, an instinct he couldn't quite articulate, but couldn't dismiss either. That evening, he drove the 47 miles to see the property himself. The ranch sprawled across 38 acres of rolling Texas hill country, with a main house, a large stable, several outbuildings, and views that stretched for miles in every direction. It was neglected, forgotten, and absolutely perfect. As he walked through the knee-high grass surrounding the stable, Marcus could almost hear the sounds of horses nickering, cowboys calling to each other, and the rhythmic clang of horseshoes being fitted in the farrier's corner. This place had history, it had soul, and it was begging for someone to believe in it again. The auction took place at the County Administration Building on a scorching Monday morning. Only 11 people attended, most of them developers and investment groups looking to subdivide the land for residential lots or flip it to corporate buyers. Marcus sat near the back, with his checkbook tucked in his vest pocket, feeling his pulse accelerate as the auctioneer began the proceedings. The opening bid was set at $42,000, significantly more than Marcus had available. He had managed to scrape together $27,000 by selling his competition horse, borrowing $8,000 from his sister Rachel against her better judgment, and withdrawing every dollar from the injury fund he'd been building for the past 8 years. When the bidding started, a woman in a tailored blazer immediately offered $45,000. A man representing a development company countered with $51,000. Marcus felt his stomach knot. He couldn't compete with these people. They had capital, business plans, and investors backing them. All he had was a checkbook that was already stretched beyond reason and a dream that most people would call reckless. But then something unexpected happened. The bidding momentum slowed. The developers started checking their tablets, running calculations, exchanging uncertain glances with their associates. One by one, they began dropping out. The woman in the blazer shook her head and crossed her arms. The development company representative made a phone call and then sat back down without bidding again. Within 20 minutes, the only remaining bidders were Marcus Webb and an older gentleman in his 60s who owned a horse breeding operation in the neighboring county. The man raised his number and offered $53,000. The auctioneer called for higher bids. Marcus took a deep breath, raised his number, and said in a voice that carried more confidence than he felt, $55,000. The older gentleman turned to look at him, evaluating him with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent decades assessing livestock and people. He raised his number again, $57,000. Marcus felt sweat trickle down his spine. He was already $20,000 over his available funds. If he went higher, he would be drowning in debt with no safety net. But if he didn't, he would lose the one opportunity that felt like it was meant for him. $60,000, he said, his voice steady now. The older gentleman hesitated. He studied Marcus for a long moment, then slowly lowered his number and gave a slight nod of respect. The auctioneer called out, "Going once, going twice, sold to bidder 23 for $60,000. Marcus Webb had just bought a failed ranch on 38 acres of Texas hill country with money he didn't have, for a purpose that everyone would say was already obsolete. When Marcus told his sister Rachel about the purchase that evening over the phone, there was a long silence before she spoke. "Tell me you're joking. Please tell me this is some kind of rodeo humor I'm not getting." Marcus tried to explain his vision, but Rachel cut him off. "You're 38 years old, Marcus. Your body is held together with surgical pins and scar tissue. You borrowed money from me for this, for a bankrupt ranch that's been rotting for 2 decades? Marcus listened to her frustration, then said something that surprised even himself. "I'm not buying a ranch, Rachel. I'm buying a future. For me, for the kids who want to learn this life, and for everyone who believes that cowboy culture is worth preserving." Rachel's voice softened slightly, but her concern remained. "And what happens when you can't make the payments? What happens when your body finally gives out and you can't work anymore?" Marcus didn't have good answers to those questions. But for the first time in years, he felt like he was moving towards something instead of just running from one rodeo to the next. The first time Marcus unlocked the stable doors and stepped inside, reality hit him like a kicked horse. The smell was overwhelming, a mixture of decay, rodent nests, and years of accumulated moisture damage. Light filtered through gaps in the roof, illuminating swirling clouds of dust that made him cough until his eyes watered. The concrete floor was cracked and uneven, with weeds pushing through in dozens of places. Old tack hung rotting on rusty hooks, leather brittle and falling apart at the slightest touch. Bird nests filled the rafters, and their droppings covered every horizontal surface in white streaks. One entire section of stalls had partially collapsed, leaving exposed beams and a dangerous tangle of splintered wood. Marcus walked slowly through the space, his boots crunching on debris and broken glass, and for the first time since the auction, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of his decision. This wasn't just a fixer-upper project. This was a disaster, and he had no clear idea how he was going to transform it into anything functional, let alone profitable. That night, Marcus sat in his trailer with a legal pad and pen, trying to sketch out some kind of realistic plan. He needed materials, equipment, labor, and most critically, capital. He estimated that basic structural repairs would cost at least $47,000, not including the livestock handling equipment, riding arena construction, and insurance requirements he would need to actually operate a training facility. He had exactly $962 remaining in his bank account. The numbers weren't just discouraging, they were impossible. He considered reaching out to his sister again, But after their last conversation, he knew that bridge was burned for the moment. He thought about applying for a small business loan, but his credit history was a patchwork of late payments and rodeo injuries that had resulted in medical collections. For hours, Marcus sat there in the cramped trailer, staring at calculations that refused to make sense, and wondering if Rachel had been right all along. Maybe he was just a stubborn fool chasing a dream that had died decades ago. The next morning, Marcus drove back to the ranch with his toolkit and a determination that felt more like desperation. If he couldn't afford to hire contractors, he would do the work himself, one painful step at a time. He started with the most basic tasks, hauling out debris, sweeping away years of accumulated filth, and removing the dangerous sections of collapsed stalls. It was brutal, physical work that left him gasping and drenched in sweat by midday. His injured shoulder screamed with every load he lifted, and his back sent sharp reminders of old injuries with every bend and twist. But with each truckload of trash he hauled to the county dump, the space began to reveal its original bones. Within 10 days, he had cleared the entire stable interior and could finally see what the building had been in its prime. The main support beams were solid oak, weathered but structurally sound after nearly 8 decades. The foundation, though cracked in places, was still level and stable. The original stall framework, though damaged, could be salvaged and rebuilt. Marcus began to see not what the stable was, but what it could become with enough sweat and stubborn refusal to quit. Word traveled slowly through the local rodeo community that Marcus Webb had bought the old Pemberton ranch. Most people thought he'd lost his mind, but a few saw something worth supporting. Vincent Martinez, the retired auctioneer who had first mentioned the property, showed up one Saturday morning with a cooler full of cold drinks and barbecue sandwiches his wife had prepared. "Figured you could use some fuel and company," he said, with a weathered grin. He stayed for 5 hours, helping Marcus sort through salvageable equipment and sharing stories about Douglas Pemberton and the days when Hollow Creek Ranch had trained some of the finest cutting horses in 3 counties. His presence reminded Marcus why he was doing this. It wasn't just about saving buildings, it was about preserving a way of life that connected generations of cowboys and kept traditions alive. A few days later, Samuel Hayes, a 52-year-old construction foreman who had competed in team roping during his younger years, stopped by unexpectedly. He walked around the property with a critical eye, examining the damaged roof, the weakened support structures, and the overall scope of work needed. Marcus braced himself for another lecture about foolishness and wasted money. Instead, Samuel said, "You're going to need serious help with that roof and those load-bearing walls. I can spare some weekend hours if you're interested." Marcus was stunned. "I can't pay much right now," he admitted honestly. Samuel waved him off. "My son rode his first bronc at a clinic Douglas Pemberton hosted back in '98. I'd like to see this place training riders again. We can work out payment arrangements later." That weekend, Samuel showed up with his 31-year-old nephew, Antonio, and together they began the technical work of reinforcing the structure and replacing the most damaged sections. The work was complex and demanding, but Samuel was patient, teaching Marcus construction skills he'd never learned and treating him like a partner rather than a charity case. As the weeks progressed, more people began appearing at the ranch. Patricia Thornton, a 59-year-old woman who owned a western wear shop in town, donated several rolls of heavy-duty tarp to weatherproof the roof temporarily until proper repairs could be completed. Gerald Foster, a retired bronc rider in his mid-60s, brought over his old training equipment that had been gathering dust in his garage for over 15 years, saying Marcus might as well put it to use since Gerald's kids had all moved to cities and had no interest in cowboy culture. Even Rachel, Marcus's skeptical sister, showed up one afternoon with her pickup truck loaded with lumber she'd gotten at cost through her husband's connections at the building supply company. She didn't apologize for her earlier harsh words, just rolled up her sleeves and worked alongside her brother for the rest of the day. Marcus felt something fundamental shift inside him as he watched these people invest their time, resources, and energy into supporting his seemingly impossible vision. He realized he wasn't alone in this fight. The community, though small and struggling with its own challenges, still believed in second chances and preserving what mattered. By the end of the third month, the stable had been transformed from a collapsing ruin into something that resembled a functional facility. The roof was repaired, the collapsed stalls had been rebuilt, and the interior was clean and organized enough to actually house horses. Marcus had spent every available moment working on the property, often staying until well past midnight, with only battery-powered work lights for illumination. His body protested constantly. His injured shoulder required ice packs every night, and he'd lost 19 pounds from the physical demands, combined with forgetting to eat regular meals. But when he stood in the center of the stable and looked around at what he'd accomplished with the help of his community, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. He felt pride, he felt purpose, and he felt like maybe, just maybe, this crazy gamble might actually work. With the physical structure finally stable and functional, Marcus faced a new challenge he hadn't fully anticipated. He needed clients, students, young riders who wanted to learn from someone who'd spent 2 decades competing at the highest levels of rodeo. The whole point of restoring Hollow Creek Ranch was to create a training facility that could teach proper technique, safety, and respect for the cowboy traditions that were fading from modern culture. But first, he had to convince parents that his operation was legitimate and worth their investment. Most established rodeo families in the region had long-standing relationships with other trainers or sent their kids to the big-name academies in Oklahoma and Wyoming. Marcus was an unknown commodity with an untested facility and a reputation as a hard-living competitor rather than a patient instructor. He spent 3 weeks making calls, sending emails, and visiting youth rodeo events to introduce himself and hand out flyers. Some parents were polite but dismissive. Others questioned his qualifications to teach, given his history of injuries. A few listened with genuine interest, but wanted to wait and see if the operation survived its first year before committing their children. Marcus understood their hesitation, but it didn't make the constant rejection any easier to handle. His breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. Jennifer Sullivan was a 36-year-old divorced mother of 2 who had recently moved to the area after a messy separation from her husband in California. She had a daughter named Olivia, age 14, who had been riding horses recreationally, but had recently expressed interest in trying barrel racing after watching videos online. Jennifer had no background in rodeo culture, no connections in the local community, and was struggling to adjust to rural Texas life while working remotely for a tech company. When Marcus approached her at a local feed store, where she was asking confused questions about horse supplements, he offered to help her figure out what she actually needed. They spent 20 minutes discussing basic horse care, and Jennifer appreciated his straightforward, no-nonsense approach. When Marcus mentioned his new training facility, Jennifer's eyes lit up. Olivia has been begging me to find someone who can teach her properly. Everyone else I've contacted either doesn't have openings or is way too expensive. What do you charge? Marcus felt his heart rate increase. This was the opportunity he'd been waiting for. I'm running a discounted rate for the first 3 months while I build my client base. Half the standard price, and if your daughter shows progress and enjoys it, we can talk about continuing at regular rates. Jennifer studied him carefully. Why so cheap? Are you actually qualified to teach kids? Marcus smiled. I've been competing professionally for 20 years. I've ridden in the national finals twice, and I'm charging less because I need to prove myself. Once word gets out about the quality of training, prices will adjust to market rate. But early clients get the founder's discount. Jennifer thought about it for a moment, then pulled out her phone. Can I bring Olivia by this weekend to see the facility? Marcus tried to keep his voice steady. Absolutely. Saturday morning works great. If you've made it this far in Marcus's journey, I'd love for you to become part of this community by hitting that subscribe button. This story is just getting started, and trust me, what happens next will surprise you. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever taken a chance on something when everyone else thought you were crazy? I'd love to hear what happened. Now let's continue with what Marcus discovered that would change everything. Jennifer Sullivan proved to be more than just Marcus's first client. She became his most vocal advocate. After watching Marcus work with Olivia for 3 sessions, teaching her not just barrel racing technique, but horse psychology, safety protocols, and the mental discipline required for competitive riding, Jennifer was genuinely impressed. Olivia, who had been sullen and withdrawn since the divorce, came alive during her lessons. She started waking up early without being asked, helping with barn chores, and talking excitedly about her progress. Jennifer documented the transformation on her social media accounts, posting videos of Olivia's improving runs and writing enthusiastic captions about the positive impact Marcus's program was having on her daughter's confidence and attitude. She tagged local parenting groups, horse enthusiast pages, and community forums. Within 3 weeks, Marcus received inquiries from 7 more families, including one from a couple who drove 90 minutes from Austin specifically because they'd seen Jennifer's posts and were impressed by what they described as authentic cowboy training, not the corporate rodeo academy experience. The momentum was building, and for the first time since purchasing the property, Marcus felt like he might actually be able to make the mortgage payments and cover operating expenses. But just as things were starting to stabilize financially, he discovered something in the stable that would transform his understanding of the property's history and his own connection to it in ways he never could have imagined. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, while Marcus was repairing one of the back stalls that he'd been using for storage. He was removing the old wooden manger, a large feeding trough that had been built into the corner, when he noticed that it wasn't attached to the wall as securely as it should have been. The entire structure shifted when he applied pressure, revealing a gap between the manger and the stone foundation. Curious, Marcus grabbed a pry bar and carefully loosened the mounting brackets. As the manger came away from the wall, he saw that there was a hollow space beneath it, a deliberately constructed cavity in the foundation that had been hidden for decades. His pulse quickened as he shone his flashlight into the opening. Inside was a metal box, approximately 2 feet long and covered in dust and cobwebs. Marcus carefully pulled the box out and carried it into the sunlight streaming through the stable doors. His hands trembled slightly as he brushed away the accumulated grime. The box was locked, but the mechanism was old and rusted. It took him only a few minutes with a screwdriver to pop it open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were dozens of items that made his breath catch in his throat. There were photographs, letters, competition ribbons, newspaper clippings, and a leather-bound journal. But it was one of the photographs that made Marcus sit down heavily on a hay bale, his mind reeling. The black and white image showed a young man, maybe 26 or 27 years old, standing proudly beside a horse in front of the very stable where Marcus now sat. The man wore competition gear and held a championship buckle. Marcus flipped the photograph over and read the faded inscription written in careful handwriting. Daniel Webb, Texas State Bronc Riding Champion, Hollow Creek Ranch, July 1983. Daniel Webb was his uncle's name. His uncle had trained here at this ranch, at this facility, over 40 years ago, before Marcus was even born. His uncle had never mentioned it, not once in all the years they'd worked together, in all the stories he'd told about his competition days. Had he ever said a single word about training at Hollow Creek Ranch? Marcus sat there in the stable, surrounded by dusty hay and old equipment, and began going through the contents of the box piece by piece. There were dozens of photographs of his uncle, some alone, some with other riders, all of them showing a young man who looked so much like Marcus that it was almost unsettling. In several photos, Daniel Webb stood next to an older man who Marcus assumed must be Douglas Pemberton, the ranch's original owner. They had their arms around each other's shoulders in some images, suggesting a close mentorship relationship. There were photos of training sessions, competition victories, and gatherings that had taken place in and around this very stable. Each image told a story of a thriving, vibrant training facility that had produced championship riders. Marcus realized with growing emotion that he hadn't stumbled upon this property by accident or luck. He had been drawn here by something deeper than conscious decision. This place was part of his family's legacy, part of his own history, in ways he was only beginning to comprehend. The ranch wasn't just a building he was trying to save. It was a connection to his uncle, to his past, and to a tradition that had been waiting for him to rediscover it. Marcus spent the entire evening and well into the night going through every item in the box, piecing together his uncle's history at Hollow Creek Ranch. He found training logs showing that Daniel Webb had spent 4 years at the facility, from 1981 to 1985, learning advanced riding techniques under Douglas Pemberton's guidance. He found competition records showing that his uncle had won multiple championships during his time training here, establishing himself as one of the most promising young riders in the state. He found letters between Daniel and Douglas that revealed a deep mutual respect and a mentor-student relationship that had clearly meant everything to his uncle during those formative years. But as Marcus continued reading, the tone of the letters began to shift. They became tense, then argumentative, documenting a growing conflict about training methods and competition ethics. The final letter, dated March 1985, was short and bitter. Douglas had written, "You're throwing away everything we've built here because of pride and stubbornness. You have the talent to be great, but you lack the discipline to see it through. Don't come back unless you're ready to commit fully." There was a handwritten note clipped to the letter in his uncle's handwriting. "Left Hollow Creek today. Won't ever train with someone who can't see past his own methods. I'll prove I can succeed without him." Marcus sat back, processing this information. His uncle had left here angry and hurt, carrying resentment that apparently lasted the rest of his life. That's why he never mentioned it. That's why he never brought Marcus here, even when they were traveling to ranches just miles away in later years. The old wounds had never healed, and Daniel had buried this chapter of his life so deeply that even his family didn't know it existed. But as Marcus looked around the restored stable, at all the work he'd poured into bringing it back to life, he realized something profound. He wasn't his uncle. He didn't have to carry those old resentments or let past conflicts define the present. He could honor his uncle's talent and the training he'd received while letting go of the bitterness that had kept Daniel away from this place. In fact, Marcus could do something his uncle never had the chance to do. He could prove that Hollow Creek Ranch could be a place of growth, mentorship, and positive transformation. He could change the legacy from one of conflict to one of redemption and continuation. The thought filled him with renewed purpose and clarity. This wasn't just about running a training facility anymore. It was about healing old wounds and creating something his uncle would have been proud of, even if he never got to see it. Marcus decided to create a memorial to his uncle and all the other riders who had trained at Hollow Creek Ranch over the decades. He cleared a wall in the stable's main area and began mounting the photographs in frames he built from reclaimed wood salvaged from the old stalls. He created a timeline showing the ranch's history, starting from its establishment in 1952 through its championship years and eventual closure. He included his uncle's competition ribbons, newspaper clippings that praised Daniel Webb's skill and sportsmanship, and copies of some of the early letters that showed the positive relationship before things deteriorated. At the center of the display, he mounted the photograph of his uncle, standing with Douglas Pemberton, but he added his own handwritten note beneath it. "Daniel Webb, 1981 to 1985, champion rider, dedicated horseman, and my uncle." This ranch lives again because of the skills you taught me and the passion for this life that you passed down. Your legacy continues here." When Vincent Martinez saw the memorial during his next visit, he stood silently in front of it for several minutes before speaking, his voice thick with emotion. "Your uncle was one of the finest riders I ever saw compete. He would be incredibly proud of what you're doing here, son. You've taken something broken and made it matter again." Word about the memorial spread through the rodeo community, and soon Marcus was receiving visits from retired riders who had trained at Hollow Creek Ranch during its glory years. They brought their own photographs, their own stories, their own memories of a time when the facility had been considered one of the premier training grounds in the state. Marcus added each contribution to the growing display, turning the memorial into a living history of Texas rodeo culture. What had started as a personal tribute to his uncle became something much larger, a celebration of everyone who had contributed to cowboy traditions in the region. The memorial attracted attention beyond just the local rodeo circuit. A journalist from a regional Western lifestyle magazine came to do a feature story about the restoration of the historic ranch and the surprising family connection Marcus had discovered. The article was picked up by a larger equestrian publication, then by a National Western Heritage Foundation. Suddenly, Marcus Webb and Hollow Creek Ranch were getting attention he never anticipated and never sought. The publicity brought both opportunities and complications that would test his commitment in new ways. The increased visibility brought more clients, with families now driving from over 200 miles away to enroll their children in what was being called authentic traditional cowboy training by various media outlets. But the attention also brought scrutiny. A blogger who focused on rodeo ethics visited the ranch and wrote a critical article questioning whether Marcus was exploiting his uncle's legacy for commercial gain rather than genuinely honoring it. An animal welfare organization sent representatives to inspect his facilities and training methods, concerned that old-school cowboy techniques might not meet modern standards for horse welfare. Insurance inspectors arrived unannounced to assess liability risks. Local zoning officials showed up to verify that his operation complied with agricultural business regulations. The simple dream of running a training facility was becoming complicated by bureaucracy, public opinion, and expectations Marcus had never considered when he bought the property. But through all of it, Marcus kept his focus on what mattered most: teaching young riders properly, treating the horses with respect, and honoring the traditions that connected him to his uncle and to generations of cowboys who had worked in this very stable. By his first full season in operation, Marcus was training 23 students, ranging in age from 9 to 17, teaching everything from basic horsemanship to advanced competition techniques in bronc riding, barrel racing, and team roping. He had hired 2 part-time instructors to help with the growing demand, including Antonio Hayes, the construction foreman's nephew, who had discovered a natural talent for teaching younger children. The ranch was operating efficiently, the facilities were in excellent condition, and Marcus was finally starting to see some financial return on his massive investment. He still owed money to his sister, to various suppliers, and to the bank that had reluctantly approved his business loan after the positive media coverage made his operation seem more viable. But he was making consistent payments, building a solid reputation, and most importantly, creating something sustainable. Hollow Creek Ranch wasn't just surviving, it was beginning to thrive in ways that exceeded even Marcus's optimistic projections. The transformation that had taken place went far beyond just the physical restoration of the ranch or the success of Marcus's training program. Something deeper had shifted in the surrounding community itself. The ranch had become a gathering place, a connection point for people who had felt increasingly disconnected in a region that was rapidly changing as cities expanded and rural traditions faded. On training days, it wasn't uncommon to find retired riders stopping by to watch the lessons and share stories about their own competition years. Students from local schools began requesting field trips to learn about Western heritage and traditional livestock handling. Jennifer Sullivan, the divorced mother who had been Marcus's first client, brought her younger son Cameron to try team roping, and the 11-year-old boy discovered that working with horses gave him a sense of confidence and accomplishment he'd never experienced in traditional sports. By the end of that first summer, both of Jennifer's children were spending nearly every weekend at the ranch, and Jennifer herself had started taking riding lessons, rediscovering a passion for horses she'd abandoned when she was a teenager. She credited Marcus and the ranch for helping her family heal and find community during one of the most difficult periods of their lives. Vincent Martinez, the retired auctioneer who had first told Marcus about the property, organized a community celebration to mark the one-year anniversary of the ranch's reopening. Over 280 people attended, including riders, families, townspeople, and visitors from 4 different counties. There was live music from a local country band, a barbecue fundraiser for the local Youth Rodeo Association, and demonstration rides that drew enthusiastic cheers from the crowd. Marcus stood near the stable entrance, watching people laugh and connect and celebrate together, and felt overwhelmed by what had been accomplished. Just 18 months earlier, he had been a worn-out competitor living in a trailer, with no real prospects beyond the next rodeo and no vision for anything better. Now he owned a thriving business, had earned the respect and support of his community, and had discovered a family history that connected him to this place in profound ways he was still processing. His sister Rachel approached him during the celebration, carrying 2 bottles of beer. She handed one to Marcus and clinked them together. "I was wrong, Marcus. I'm sorry I doubted you and said those harsh things. What you've built here, it's remarkable. It's important. And I'm proud of you." Marcus felt emotion tighten his throat. He pulled his sister into a hug. "You helped me do this, Rachel. That lumber, those weekends you spent working here, the money you loaned me when no one else would. I couldn't have done any of this alone." But the real miracle that people were beginning to recognize wasn't just about the restoration of an abandoned ranch or the success of a training program. It was about what happened when someone refused to give up on traditions that mattered, when they invested everything they had into preserving skills and values that modern society often dismissed as obsolete. Hollow Creek Ranch had become a symbol of resilience, community, and the belief that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds seem impossible. Marcus received dozens of emails and messages from people across the country who had read about the ranch and were inspired by his story. Several were from young people considering careers in rodeo or ranching who had been discouraged by family members telling them there was no future in cowboy culture. Marcus tried to respond to every message personally, encouraging them to pursue their passions and reminding them that success often comes from the most unexpected places and requires believing in something before anyone else does. The animal welfare organization that had initially seemed like a threatening obstacle ended up giving Hollow Creek Ranch their highest rating for training facilities, praising Marcus's approach of combining traditional techniques with modern understanding of horse psychology and welfare. The inspection that Marcus had worried would shut him down instead resulted in his facility being featured as a case study for ethical rodeo training. The blogger who had questioned his motives returned to write a follow-up article praising the way Marcus had balanced commercial success with genuine respect for heritage and tradition. Each challenge that had seemed overwhelming at the time had ultimately led to unexpected opportunities and recognition that strengthened rather than threatened the operation. As Marcus reflected on the journey during quiet evening hours in the stable, he understood that none of it had been about him personally. He had simply been willing to take the first terrifying step, to believe in something when belief seemed foolish, and to work relentlessly without any guarantee of success. The real credit belonged to everyone who had helped along the way, to the community that had supported him, and to the generations of cowboys who had established the traditions he was now carrying forward into a new era. 15 months after purchasing the property, Marcus received a phone call that brought everything full circle in a way he never expected. A woman named Carol Webb, who identified herself as his Uncle Daniel's former girlfriend from the 1980s, had read about Hollow Creek Ranch in a magazine article. She explained that she had kept a box of Daniel's belongings after their relationship ended. Items he had never retrieved, including more photographs and personal journals from his time training at the ranch. She wanted to return them to the family, and thought Marcus, given his connection to the property, was the right person to have them. When Carol arrived the following week, she brought not just photographs, but also a series of letters that Daniel had written to her during 1986, a year after leaving Hollow Creek Ranch. In those letters, Marcus's uncle expressed deep regret about how things had ended with Douglas Pemberton, acknowledged that his own stubbornness and pride had contributed significantly to the conflict, and admitted that his time training at Hollow Creek Ranch had been the most formative period of his life. The letters revealed that Daniel had carried his own regret for years, wishing he had handled things differently and reconnected with his mentor before it was too late. One letter in particular struck Marcus deeply. His uncle had written, "I learned everything that made me successful at Hollow Creek, but I was too young and arrogant to appreciate what Douglas was trying to teach me about humility and patience. I won championships after I left, but I never found another mentor who believed in me the way he did. That's my biggest regret, Carol. I let pride destroy something precious." Marcus added the letters to the memorial, placing them next to his uncle's photograph and competition records. It felt like the final piece of a puzzle, the healing of wounds that had existed long before Marcus even knew about this place. He also added a new section to the memorial dedicated to Douglas Pemberton, honoring the ranch's founder and the countless young riders he had mentored over 4 decades. Marcus reached out to Douglas's surviving relatives and gathered more photographs and stories, creating a comprehensive tribute to the man who had built Hollow Creek Ranch from nothing and had shaped the careers of so many championship riders. The memorial was no longer just about his uncle. It had become a celebration of mentorship itself, of the relationships between teachers and students that transcend individual egos and temporary conflicts, and of the enduring impact that dedicated mentors have on the lives they touch. The transformation of Hollow Creek Ranch continued to ripple outward in unexpected ways. 3 of Marcus's students qualified for state-level youth competitions in their first season, with one 14-year-old girl named Ashley Brennan winning the barrel racing championship in her age division. Her victory brought more attention to the training program and validated Marcus's teaching methods in the eyes of skeptical rodeo families who valued results over sentiment. Several professional riders began asking if they could use the facilities for training camps and clinics, recognizing that Marcus had created something special that went beyond just teaching basics. The ranch was becoming a hub for rodeo culture in the region, a place where tradition and innovation coexisted, where young riders learned not just technical skills, but also the values of sportsmanship, hard work, and respect for animals and heritage. Marcus's relationship with his sister Rachel deepened as she became more involved in the ranch's success. She started handling the business administration, bookkeeping and marketing, bringing professional skills that Marcus lacked and freeing him to focus on training and facility management. Their partnership healed old wounds and created a new dynamic based on mutual respect and shared purpose. Rachel's husband, Kevin, began helping with facility maintenance and construction projects, expanding the ranch's capabilities. The family that had been fragmented and disconnected was now united around something meaningful, and that transformation was perhaps the most personal miracle of all. Vincent Martinez, now 72 years old, became a fixture at the ranch, showing up several times a week to watch training sessions and share his encyclopedic knowledge of rodeo history with the young riders. He began conducting informal oral history sessions, recording stories from retired riders and preserving memories that would otherwise be lost. His presence created a bridge between generations, ensuring that the traditions and values of older cowboys were passed down to teenagers who might otherwise never connect with that heritage. The ranch had become exactly what Marcus had envisioned during those desperate early days when success seemed impossible. A living, breathing community center that preserved the past while nurturing the future. Hollow Creek Ranch continues to operate successfully, now in its fourth year under Marcus's stewardship. He has expanded to serve 31 students on a regular basis and has developed specialized programs for different skill levels and disciplines. The facility has trained 8 apprentice instructors who are learning not just how to teach riding techniques, but also how to mentor young people and instill the values that make rodeo culture meaningful beyond just competition results. Marcus has established scholarship programs for families who can't afford the full tuition costs, ensuring that financial barriers don't prevent talented young riders from accessing quality training. The memorial has grown to include contributions from over 50 families, creating what historians now recognize as one of the most comprehensive collections of regional rodeo history in the entire state. Marcus Webb is no longer just a worn-out competitor trying to survive from one paycheck to the next. He's a successful business owner, a respected mentor, a community leader, and the guardian of a legacy that connects past, present, and future in ways that continue to unfold. The impact of what Marcus built extends far beyond the physical boundaries of the 38-acre property. Several of his former students have gone on to compete at national levels, carrying with them not just the technical skills they learned, but also the values and approach to horsemanship that Marcus emphasized. They speak in interviews about the importance of respecting traditions, treating animals ethically, and understanding that rodeo is about more than just winning buckles and prize money. These young riders are becoming ambassadors for a more thoughtful, sustainable approach to cowboy culture, and they consistently credit their time at Hollow Creek Ranch as the foundation for their success and their perspective. Marcus receives messages regularly from parents thanking him for the positive influence he's had on their children, many of whom came to the ranch struggling with confidence, direction, or behavioral issues, and left transformed by the structure, responsibility, and sense of purpose that comes from working with horses and pursuing mastery of difficult skills. The discovery of his uncle's hidden history at the ranch continues to resonate in Marcus's daily life. He often finds himself thinking about the parallels between Daniel's journey and his own, the ways that pride and stubbornness can both drive success and create unnecessary conflict, and the importance of learning from the mistakes of previous generations rather than simply repeating them. Marcus has made a conscious effort to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than ego, to acknowledge when he's wrong and to apologize when necessary. These might seem like small things, but they've created a culture at Hollow Creek Ranch that feels different from many other training facilities. Students and their families consistently comment on the supportive, non-toxic atmosphere, the way competition is encouraged but never at the expense of sportsmanship or kindness, and the sense that everyone at the ranch is part of something larger than themselves. Marcus has also made peace with his own physical limitations. His body will never fully recover from 2 decades of professional competition, and he's accepted that his days of riding broncs are permanently over. But rather than viewing this as a loss, he's embraced his role as a teacher and mentor, recognizing that he can have a far greater impact by training the next generation than he ever could by continuing to compete himself. His injuries, which once felt like markers of a wasted life, now serve as teaching tools. He shares his experiences honestly with students, explaining the importance of proper technique not just for competition success, but for long-term physical health. He teaches them to respect the danger inherent in rodeo, to take calculated risks rather than reckless ones, and to understand that a long, sustainable career is more valuable than a brief, spectacular one that ends in permanent injury. These lessons, coming from someone who learned them the hard way, carry weight that no amount of theoretical instruction could provide. The relationship between Marcus and Jennifer Sullivan, his first client, evolved in unexpected ways. What started as a simple business arrangement grew into a deep friendship based on shared values and complementary strengths. Jennifer's organizational skills and technological knowledge complemented Marcus's hands-on expertise and traditional knowledge. She helped him develop a professional website, establish social media presence that wasn't embarrassingly outdated, and implement online booking and payment systems that made the business more efficient. In return, Marcus helped Jennifer's children develop confidence, work ethic, and connection to a culture that valued authentic skill over social media performance. By the third year of operation, Jennifer had become the ranch's unofficial marketing director and client relations manager, roles she performed with enthusiasm while maintaining her remote tech job. There were moments when both of them wondered if their relationship might develop into something romantic, but they ultimately decided that what they had built as friends and business partners was too valuable to risk. Some relationships transcend conventional categories, and theirs was one of them. The financial situation that once seemed so desperate has stabilized into something sustainable, though far from luxurious. Marcus is making steady progress on his debts, and has even managed to rebuild a modest emergency fund. He's learned to live simply, finding satisfaction in work and community rather than material accumulation. The ranch generates enough income to support ongoing operations, modest salaries for Marcus and his part-time staff, and gradual improvements to facilities and equipment. There are no profits being extracted for personal luxury, but there's also no longer the desperate fear of imminent financial collapse that characterized those first 18 months. Marcus has learned that success doesn't always look like wealth or fame. Sometimes it looks like being able to pay your bills on time, sleep without constant anxiety, and wake up each morning knowing your work matters to people beyond yourself. The community celebration that Vincent Martinez organized has become an annual tradition, growing larger each year as word spreads and more people want to be part of what Hollow Creek Ranch represents. The most recent event drew over 400 attendees and included demonstrations from visiting professional riders, a youth competition showcase, live music, food vendors, and a silent auction that raised funds for the scholarship program. Local businesses have begun sponsoring aspects of the event, recognizing that the ranch's success has positive ripple effects throughout the regional economy. What started as one man's desperate gamble on an abandoned property has become a genuine community institution, a source of regional pride and identity in an area that had been losing both for decades. Marcus still experiences moments of doubt and exhaustion. Running a business, teaching students, maintaining facilities, managing relationships, and carrying the weight of other people's expectations is relentlessly demanding. There are days when his body hurts so badly he can barely move, when difficult students or entitled parents test his patience, when equipment breaks or accidents happen or financial pressures resurface. On those days, he walks through the stable, where he first discovered his uncle's hidden history, stands in front of the memorial he created, and reminds himself why he chose this path. He thinks about the young riders whose lives have been positively shaped by their time at the ranch. He thinks about the traditions and skills that would have been lost without places like this to preserve and teach them. He thinks about his Uncle Daniel, whose talent and passion were real, even though his story didn't have a perfect ending, and about all the other cowboys whose contributions deserve to be remembered and honored. These thoughts don't make the challenges disappear, but they provide perspective and renewed commitment to continue the work regardless of difficulty. The hidden compartment beneath the manger, where Marcus discovered the metal box that changed everything, remains preserved as part of the ranch's history. He's installed a plexiglass cover over the space so visitors can see it while protecting the historical integrity of the structure. Students always want to hear the story of the discovery, and Marcus never tires of telling it. He describes the moment of finding the box, the shock of seeing his uncle's name on those old photographs, and the realization that he had been led to this place by forces deeper than conscious decision. He talks about how sometimes our greatest discoveries are hidden beneath ordinary surfaces, waiting for the right person at the right time to uncover them. He talks about legacy, about the ways we're connected to people and places we never knew about, and about the responsibility we have to honor those who came before while creating something meaningful for those who come after. These conversations, happening in a stable that nearly became a parking lot for a housing development, feel sacred in ways that transcend religious language. And every time Marcus walks through the stable and smells the leather and horse sweat, hears the sounds of students learning and horses moving in their stalls, and feels the familiar ache in his permanently damaged shoulder, he remembers why it was all worth it. Because some traditions deserve to be preserved, some dreams are worth every sacrifice required to achieve them, and some miracles happen one painful, determined step at a time. The stable that once hid his uncle's secret beneath the manger now holds stories of dozens of young lives being shaped, traditions being passed forward, and a community being strengthened by shared values and purpose. What felt divine that day when he first discovered the hidden box wasn't the box itself, but the realization that he was exactly where he was meant to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do, connected to a story much larger than himself. If you've made it to the end of Marcus's incredible journey, I want to sincerely thank you for being part of this community. Stories like this one remind us that it's never too late to start over, that taking risks on what matters most is always worth it, and that sometimes the greatest gifts in life are the ones we have to fight hardest to earn. Please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more inspiring true stories like this one. I'd genuinely love to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever restored something old or taken on a project that everyone thought was impossible? Have you discovered unexpected connections to your own family history? What did Marcus's story teach you about perseverance, legacy, or community? Share your thoughts and experiences, because your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Thank you for watching, and remember that sometimes the most meaningful achievements come from simply refusing to give up on what matters, even when the path forward seems impossible.